When my father-in-law came to live with me 5 years ago, I was overwhelmed by all the important decisions I had to help him make, especially the one about choosing the right Medicare plan. They got more than 100 plans alone in Minnesota, so how was I supposed to know which one was right for him? Thank goodness for the Senior Linkage Line. It's a free statewide service of the Minnesota Board on Aging in partnership with Trellis and the other area agencies on aging. They connect us to services and supports to help us find the answers we need. And honey, it's free. Did y'all hear me? Free help getting the best Medicare plan for you and your loved ones. The folks at the Senior Linkage Line, let me tell y'all something about them. They really care. They will work with you to figure out if your medications are covered. That way you know ahead of time what you're going to pay out of pocket. So do like I did. Give them a call at 800-333-2433 or log on to trellisconnects.org. And y'all best hurry up because time is running out to change your Medicare plan. You got until Tuesday, December 7th to find one that's right for you. So don't wait. Call the Senior Linkage Line today at 800-333-2433 or log on to trellisconnects.org. Let them help you like they helped me. You'll be glad you did.
Want your boss to put some real action behind the rhetoric when they talk about making your workplace more inclusive? Find out how to hold their feet to the fire to demand diversity on the Diversity Dude podcast.
I don't know if you have been as disturbed as I have by the story that came out this week. Suni Lee, Olympic gold medalist, represented our country and our beloved Minnesota, where we're based, on the biggest level and the highest stage. It's hard for me to think about it. It's hard for me to even talk about it. That this young woman, Olympic gold medalist, went over to Tokyo, brought home gold for her country, stepped in when the presumptive gold medalist decided that she did not want to participate because she had the twisties, and killed it. And was amazing. And her family story, the sacrifices that her father made, her mother made, her community made to get her where she is today. First Hmong American to do what she did. And then she was selected for Dancing with the Stars. Suni Lee goes out to Los Angeles to tape the show, and she is a victim of Asian hate crime. Something that nobody's child, no adult even, should have to experience. Hate based on the color of your skin. You know, this is the Diversity Dude podcast where we talk about issues like this. And you all know Reg Clark signed off the show a couple of weeks ago, and we've been having a series of very capable guests rotating in and out to chat with me about some of the issues related to diversity and inclusion. And I was so delighted to find Tom Barnett, CEO of the Seminal Group. He helps cities and counties and states and a lot of companies think about diversity, think about inclusion, and make sure that the workplaces and the environments that they are creating give people a sense of belonging. Tom, thank you so much for being on the Diversity Dude podcast. It's great to have you.
Sheletta, thanks for having me today to talk about such an important topic.
You know, I wish we were talking about something else. But, you know, what we do here on this platform and on this podcast is we have these crucial conversations. They are tough. But we like to say change begins with a conversation, and that conversation starts here. You know, I was looking at the history of these hate crimes, and what happened to Suni Lee is just unimaginable. You are not bothering anybody. You are walking down the street. You are minding your own business, but because you are an Asian person or LGBTQ or a Muslim or African American, somebody from the majority population decides that they are going to make you pay for breathing air and being in their space and just being who you are. Tom, this bothered me so much because this young woman had not done anything to anybody and surely did not deserve this.
No, and you hit on a couple of things. Is that unfortunately, this is the most recent incident over the past year and a half, especially of Asian hate. And that over the past year and a half, the former administration calling COVID the China flu, giving credence to a lot of ignorance and different beliefs, that the situation that you just mentioned that went on with Suni occurred. Unfortunately, a few months prior to that in New York City, I think everyone probably remembers the elderly woman in New York who was basically beaten right in front of some doormen who did nothing. And so it's one of those things that, to your point, is unfortunately we continue to see and hear about these things. And so our call to action, and you and I have talked, off camera, but part of our conversations is not only to inform, but give people a call to action. Because that call to action, if we see something, say something or get the appropriate people involved. Because the last thing I'll say before turning it back to you is, unfortunately, this country also, when you mentioned, the sacrifices and what she did on the Olympic front, is that, again, unfortunately, this country, a lot of people knew this person as Cassius Clay in 1960. But in 1960, a guy by the name of Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay at the time, came back from winning gold to a segregated Kentucky and couldn't get a meal. And so we're speaking specifically around Asian hate today and how it's impacted an Olympic, hero. But it's one of those things that we've had a sordid past that we really need to deal with in these conversations. But more importantly, the actions that we take or what we talk about and what we're going to implore people to do.
How is it that you just gave us the history lesson in 90 seconds and we're having a conversation today that they had about Cassius Clay back then, and nothing in all these years have changed? How is that possible, Tom, when we've got DEI people out the wazoo, you're working with everybody, people are calling you all across the country to come in and fix the problems that they're having in their city government, in their state, in their corporations, but the same thing that happened to Suni Lee happened to Muhammad Ali?
Right. Yeah, and to your point, the sordid history that we have to continue to talk about is the recognition of that history. And so we're talking specifically around Asian hate today. But again, and looking back at our American history, if we go back to World War II, the internment of Asians after the surprise attack of Pearl Harbor, is it, if we don't learn from that history and being able to understand what ignorance can do to this one United States, you get the repeat offenses that we're talking about today. So you fast forward from the 40s to 1960 to 2021. If we don't insert and if we don't have a change of heart, we're doomed to repeat. And that's what we find ourselves in, is we're chasing our tails, because to your earlier comments also, is that it's history, but all have to be inclusive in knowing and understanding and wanting to do better from that history. And so that's kind of where we find ourselves, again, chasing our tails. But that's why we're here. And we want to inform and we want to give people what they need to help make the change. So we're not having this conversation in 5 years from now.
How can we fix it? I don't want Suni Lee walking down the street in LA and experiencing a hate crime. I don't want my boys to be afraid to walk to Subway to get them a sandwich because somebody might profile them. We always want to talk about a post-racial society, and I'm more afraid now than ever for my kids to go anywhere, because these people are doing these things and it seems like they don't have a conscience about it and nobody's being held accountable. So is there a way to stop it?
I think one of the things in your opening comment and just speaking about what happened specifically to her, but then also with other minority groups, is that that's key. One of the challenges I'm going to put forth today to everybody is look at ourselves, especially if you're a person of color, that we are no longer minority. We are an emerging majority. And in the next 10 years, the emerging majority of BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous people of color, will be the majority Americans in this country. So say it again, in the next 10 years, the emerging majority will be the most populous Americans out there. And so what does that mean? That means that we all collectively, there's strength in numbers. So people of color, because we used Suni, we talked about Muhammad Ali. That would be Asian and the Black cultures. Is that we all have to look at this as a singular event to kind of form a unified front and not be pitted against each other. One, that's for our brothers and sisters, people of color. But for our white compadres, it's one of those things, back to what you mentioned about the history. We're having the conversation, but the conversation for our white compadres needs to be one of listening and being very intentional to not only listen, but be empathetic. Because at this point in time, our life experiences are our own. But don't assume that just because something doesn't happen to you, that it didn't happen. And I think that's the key to answer your questions. Now, it sounds easier, but that's what we've got to do.
Yeah. And, I experienced that this week. I was online and there was a little Black girl here in Minnesota at a Prior Lake High School. There was some video online. She was called out all kinds of racial epithets. It was very derogatory. And, it triggered an incident for me, where my son was playing at a playground and we were getting out the car. His therapists were there. And 3 of my 4 kids have autism. So it was not just an opportunity to play, but the therapists were there to teach him how to engage with other kids. Right. So he would not have so much social anxiety. So they were giving him the words to say, and they were kind of helping him with his play and what to say and how to respond if another child came over and asked him to do something. And so he gets out the car. They identify a little boy playing by himself. Right. Mm-hmm. And so my son says, "Hey, buddy, you want to play?" And the little boy said, "There's niggers." Right. These are little kids, 7, 8 years old. So the mama's mortified, of course. She's, mortified. And the therapists have never seen anything like this because we're probably some of the first African-American clients, right? So, and my son has never been called that word before. We don't use that word. So he thought the little boy was saying diggers. So my son runs over to the sandbox because he thinks his new friend is coming with him because the diggers are at the sandbox. So my child is wondering why everybody's petrified and stationary and not moving because he heard diggers, but we heard what the little boy really said. So I'm typing this up on social media, and I took a picture that I had from my son from the playground and said, "This is what happened to me. This is my experience." The first thing that white people were saying was, "I don't believe it. It didn't happen. This doesn't even sound real." Because it's not their lived experience. I said, well, you know what? You don't have to take my word for it. Why don't you call the Lovas Institute and talk to the 2 therapists who were there? It's in their clinical notes. It happened about 2 years ago. And there's no way you can go back 2 years in doctor's notes. So I guess if 2 white women tell you that it happened, you'll believe them. But the African-American mother who experienced it and was mortified and had to teach not only her son, but the therapist a lesson about racism that day at the park, my word is not good enough. So when you start talking about listening and understanding and hearing what people of color are saying to the white community, I want you to expound on that because it's so important not to be judgmental because these are our experiences and nobody wants to lie about racism, especially when we talk about something that our children have experienced.
Yeah, that is so unfortunate that you've got that testimony. And I'm sure that if you talk to any person of color, unfortunately, we've had a few of those in our lives. But I think, as you just mentioned, it's really important in having the conversations and having people that don't look like us understand that as we sit here today, there are very 2 different Americas. When you think about economics, when you think about healthcare, when you think about public schools, policing, the judicial system, those life experiences that you and I experience are very different from those that don't have melanin in their skin. And so being able to have the conversations, but more importantly, as I mentioned, there has to be at this point in time, very intentional listening. And that listening then has to have actions and accountability held to it. And I think back to your earlier comment as to why do these things continue to happen? It's because there's no accountability and there hasn't been that intentional listening. And so that's one of those things that as we continue to have this conversation, is that there's learnings that need to be had by all, but those that are today in the majority, don't forget this emerging majority and the importance of BIPOC or Black, Indigenous people of color. And so in order for us, although we have a live two Americas today, we're striving to have one. But that has to be where there has to be that intentional listening and accountability.
Well, Tom, I can't thank you enough for being on the Diversity Dude podcast. Please forgive me if I'm being too forward. I have been filling in since Reg Clark has left. We are in search of a new Diversity Dude. Until we find somebody, would you please do us the honor at ShelettaMakesMeLaugh.com of filling in until we get ourselves a permanent host for this podcast?
It will be my pleasure, and I appreciate the invite.
Hallelujah. I'm so glad, because when I read your resume and I got your referral and invited you on for, a guest spot, I thought it would just be so amazing, because the Diversity Dude podcast is one of our most popular shows here at ShelettaMakesMeLaugh.com. And I have been interviewing guests and talking about, diversity and inclusion and belonging issues on this show. And people enjoy it, but they really come here to hear from their dude, their diversity dude, somebody who is abreast and educated, understanding, and knowledgeable about all things related to diversity and inclusion. And I can't give them that. I'm a comedian. I'm a podcaster. I'm a mom. I can tell you all about autism. I can crack some jokes, but, unless it's my lived experience, I don't have the expertise. So I would love for you to do that. And thank you. And starting next week, Tom Barnett with the Seminal Group, the CEO, is going to be filling in here on the Diversity Dude. Thank you so much for taking the time, not just to be with us today, but to fill this void that we have on this show after Reg Clark signed off, and to give the people what they need, which is education, information that they can take back, not just into their workplaces, but into their homes and into their community, into their churches, like you said, to make this one America, because it's really what we're striving for, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It is. Thank you. Great topic. And I appreciate it. I appreciate you being able again to bring me to your great platform.
Well, I know that our listeners, our viewers, the people who enjoy the show are in capable hands with you. The Seminal Group is a wonderful place. Have heard so many good things about the work that you are doing across this country. In the areas of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So, Tom, next week you on your own, child. I'm gonna leave you over here by yourself.
Thank you for allowing me to have the training wheels on today. But next week, I'm free. Right. Thank you. I appreciate it. I got you.
All right. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. Y'all have a good one.
All right. And you all, thank you for being here. We appreciate your time. And next week, don't forget, Tom Barnett with the Seminal Group will be your fill-in host.
Tune in each week how to demand and implement diversity and inclusion at your job. To hear more, check out his previous shows on ShelettaMakesMeLaugh.com.
It never fails. Every fall, I fall into a funk. Daylight savings time used to have me singing the blues until I found some help at BetterHelp.com. BetterHelp.com. It's an online resource that matches you with your own licensed professional therapist. Listen, ain't no shame in talking to somebody about how you feel. Your mom and your friends are great to talk to when you have problems. They're your go-to. But sometimes you need a professional, and that's where you need to call BetterHelp.com. Sometimes it's the only way to get your happy back. BetterHelp.com offers secure online counseling, either over the phone or via video. Now, it's not a crisis line.
But BetterHelp.com has counselors who'll help you with your anger, stress, depression, or anxiety. The good news is that they're more affordable than traditional in-person counseling sessions. But you know what? If your money is funny, don't worry. BetterHelp.com even offers financial aid. Let BetterHelp.com help you get your happy back. Log on today to BetterHelp.com.